William Morrison stood frozen in the doorway of his grandmother's old Victorian house. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows, illuminating the broken glass scattered across the hardwood floor. The portrait that had hung above the fireplace for 3 generations now lay in ruins, its ornate frame twisted and splintered. Kate's hand trembled as she clutched his arm. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke those 4 words that made his blood run cold. "It's happening again. It's happening again." The portrait had been of his great-grandfather, painted in 1924. The old man's stern face had watched over the family room for decades, those piercing blue eyes seeming to follow anyone who walked past. Now, those eyes stared up from 1,000 fractured pieces on the floor. William's mind raced back to the first incident 6 months ago. They had just inherited the house after his grandmother's passing. Kate had been excited about moving into such a beautiful historic home, despite its need for repairs. They had spent weeks cleaning out decades of accumulated belongings, discovering family treasures and forgotten memories in every corner. The first time had been a Tuesday morning. Kate had gone downstairs to make coffee and found the portrait on the floor. The nail hadn't fallen out. The wire hadn't snapped. There was no earthquake, no strong wind. No logical explanation for how a 50-pound painting had simply removed itself from the wall and crashed to the ground. They had laughed it off then, joking about the old house settling. William had carefully restored the painting, reinforcing the hanging wire and using stronger wall anchors. They thought that was the end of it. The second time happened 3 weeks later. This time, William witnessed it himself. He had been reading in his favorite armchair when he heard a creaking sound. Looking up, he watched in disbelief as the portrait slowly tilted forward, as if invisible hands were pushing it from behind. It hung at an impossible angle for several seconds before crashing down, the glass shattering in an almost identical pattern to the first incident. That time, they couldn't laugh. Kate had suggested calling someone, perhaps a structural engineer, to check the walls. William had agreed, but deep down, he knew no engineer could explain what he had seen. The portrait had moved on its own. They had the painting restored again, this time by a professional. The conservator had been puzzled by the damage pattern, mentioning it was unusual for glass to break so uniformly. William hadn't told him about the previous incident. After that, they installed a security camera. For 2 months, nothing happened. The portrait remained firmly in place. Great-grandfather Morrison continuing his eternal vigil over the family room. They began to relax, to forget. Kate even started joking about their haunted painting when friends visited. But now, standing in the doorway on this sunny Thursday afternoon, William understood that whatever was happening wasn't going to stop. The security camera would tell them something, but he was afraid of what they might see. Kate moved past him into the room, careful to avoid the glass. She knelt beside the ruined portrait, her fingers hovering over the fragments. "Look at this," she said, her voice steadier now but still carrying an undertone of fear. William joined her, crouching down to see what had caught her attention. The glass had shattered in a perfect spiral pattern, radiating out from where his great-grandfather's heart would have been. It was too precise, too deliberate to be random. "We need to check the camera," William said, though part of him wanted to leave the house right then and never look back. They went to his study where the security monitor was set up. William's hands shook slightly as he rewound the footage. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m., just 20 minutes ago. They had been in the garden, planting the roses Kate had bought at the farmer's market. On the screen, the family room appeared peaceful and still. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight. Then, at exactly 2:47, the portrait began to move. Not tilting forward this time, but vibrating, as if experiencing its own personal earthquake. The vibration intensified until the glass suddenly exploded outward, sending shards flying across the room. The painting then lifted completely off the wall, hovering for a moment before dropping straight down. Kate gasped. William replayed the footage, hoping his eyes had deceived him. But there it was again, the painting floating in midair for a full second before falling. "We can't stay here tonight," Kate said, her practicality overcoming her fear. "We'll go to my sister's house. Tomorrow, we can figure out what to do." But William wasn't listening. He was staring at the frozen frame on the monitor, at the moment just before the painting fell. In the corner of the screen, barely visible in the shadows by the bookshelf, was a figure. It was translucent, hardly more than a shimmer in the air, but unmistakably human-shaped. "Kate," he said slowly, "look at this." She leaned closer to the screen, squinting at where he was pointing. When she saw it, her sharp intake of breath told him she saw it too. "Is that—" She couldn't finish the question. William enhanced the image as much as the system would allow. The figure became slightly clearer, though still ghostly and indistinct, but there was something familiar about the stance, the broad shoulders, the way the head was tilted. "It looks like the man in the portrait," Kate whispered. "It looks like your great-grandfather." William's rational mind wanted to deny it, to find some logical explanation, but as he stared at the image, he couldn't escape the truth. The figure in the shadows had the same bearing, the same presence as the man who had stared down at them from above the fireplace. "We need to know more about him," William said. "About the family history. Maybe there's something we're missing." Kate nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'll call your Aunt Margaret. She kept all your grandmother's papers and photo albums. If anyone knows the family secrets, it's her." As Kate made the call, William returned to the family room. He stood among the broken glass, looking up at the empty space on the wall. The afternoon sun had shifted, and the room was growing darker. He could feel something in the air, a presence that made the hair on his arms stand up. His phone buzzed. A text from Kate. "Your aunt says she'll meet us at her house in an hour. She says there are things about your great-grandfather we need to know." William took one last look around the room. As he turned to leave, he could have sworn he heard a whisper. So faint, it might have been the wind. But there was no wind inside the house. The whisper seemed to say a single word: remember. An hour later, they sat in Aunt Margaret's tidy living room, cups of tea growing cold on the coffee table. Margaret, his father's older sister, had always been the family historian, the keeper of stories and secrets. Now in her 70s, she moved with purpose as she retrieved a large leather-bound album from a cabinet. "I wondered when this would come up," she said, settling into her chair with the album on her lap. "Your grandmother made me promise to keep quiet, but now that she's gone and the portrait is acting up again, I suppose it's time you knew." "Again?" William leaned forward. "This has happened before?" Margaret nodded, opening the album to a yellowed newspaper clipping. 1962. Your father was just a boy. The portrait fell 3 times in 1 month, each time on the 15th, at exactly 2:47 inches the afternoon. Kate grabbed William's hand. "Today was the 15th, but that's not the strangest part," Margaret continued, turning to another page. "This is your great-grandfather, Harrison Morrison. He died in 1943. But not the way the family tells it. The official story was a heart attack at his desk. The truth. Well, the truth is more complicated." She showed them a photograph of Harrison Morrison standing in front of the very portrait that now lay shattered in their family room. He looked younger in the photo than in the painting, perhaps in his 40s, with the same piercing blue eyes that William had inherited. "Harrison was a collector," Margaret explained. "Art, antiques, rare books. But he was particularly obsessed with objects that were said to have unusual properties. Your grandmother called it his dangerous hobby." She turned to another page, revealing a manifest from an auction house dated 1923. One item was circled in faded ink. Portrait frame. Italian. 16th century. Formerly property of the Medici family. Note: lot withdrawn from previous sales due to unusual circumstances. "He bought the frame a year before commissioning his portrait," Margaret said. "According to your grandmother, strange things began happening immediately. Objects moving on their own, cold spots in the house, whispers in empty rooms." Harrison became obsessed with the frame, spending hours staring at it, even before the portrait was painted. William studied the auction manifest. What were the unusual circumstances that caused it to be withdrawn from previous sales? Margaret's expression grew darker. 3 previous owners died within a year of purchasing it. All on the same date, at the same time. The 15th of the month, at 2:47 inches the afternoon. The room fell silent. Outside, a cloud passed over the sun, dimming the light through the windows. Harrison knew about the deaths, Margaret continued. But he thought he could control whatever power the frame possessed. He was wrong. On March 15, 1943, at 2:47 p.m., he was found dead in the family room. The portrait had fallen from the wall, and the frame had shattered, a piece of wood piercing his heart. Kate's grip on William's hand tightened. But the frame was repaired. The portrait was rehung. Margaret nodded grimly. Your great-grandmother insisted on it. She said Harrison's spirit was trapped, that destroying the portrait would condemn him to eternal unrest. So the family kept it, generation after generation, even as it periodically fell from the wall, always on the 15th, always at 2:47. But it's been falling more frequently, William said. 3 times in 6 months. Yes, Margaret agreed. The intervals have been shortening with each generation. Your grandmother experienced it twice a year in her final years. She believed Harrison was growing desperate, trying to communicate something important. She turned to the last page of the album. It was a letter in Harrison's handwriting, dated March 14th, 1943, the day before his death. My dearest family, William read aloud. If you are reading this, then my experiment has failed, and I am gone. The frame contains something ancient, something that should have been left undisturbed. I thought I could master it, use its power for our family's benefit. Instead, I have become its prisoner. Do not destroy the portrait. As long as it exists, I can fight to keep the entity contained. But if the frame ever fully breaks, if the binding is completely severed, it will be free to claim another. The portrait must be maintained, no matter the cost. Forgive me, Harrison. The 3 of them sat in stunned silence. Finally, Kate spoke. The frame is completely destroyed now. We made sure of it when we cleaned up the last time. We thought we were being thorough. Margaret closed the album with a heavy sigh. Then we must assume that whatever Harrison was containing has been released. William thought about the figure in the security footage. The whispered word, remember. Was it his great-grandfather trying to warn them? Or something else entirely? What do we do now? He asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. Margaret stood, moving to her bookshelf with surprising agility. She pulled out a slim journal bound in black leather. This was Harrison's, his notes on the frame and the entity. Your grandmother gave it to me before she died, made me promise to give it to you if the portrait ever broke completely. William took the journal, feeling its weight in his hands. The leather was cold to the touch, despite the warm room. You need to read it, Margaret said. Tonight. All of it. Harrison spent 20 years researching the frame's history. If there's a way to stop what's coming, it will be in those pages. As they prepared to leave, Margaret pulled William aside. There's one more thing. Your grandmother said that in her dreams, Harrison told her the entity feeds on family bloodlines. It attaches to one family and slowly consumes them, generation by generation. The Morrisons were not its first victims, and if we don't stop it, we won't be the last. The drive back to Kate's sister's house was quiet. The journal sat on William's lap, unopened, like a bomb waiting to explode. Kate drove, stealing worried glances at him every few minutes. We could leave, she said finally. Pack up, move across the country. Let someone else deal with the house. William shook his head. You heard what Margaret said. It feeds on family bloodlines. Running won't help. Besides, I can't let whatever this thing is loose on some unsuspecting family. That night, in the guest room of Kate's sister's house, William opened his great-grandfather's journal. The first entry was dated January 3rd, 1924. Today I took possession of the frame. The moment it entered my home, I felt the change in the air. It is as if the house itself recoiled from its presence. No matter, I have studied the arcane long enough to know that power always comes with a price. I am willing to pay it. As William read through the night, Kate sleeping fitfully beside him, the story unfolded. Harrison had traced the frame's history back to Renaissance Florence, where it had been commissioned by a member of the Medici family. The wood came from a gallows where an accused witch had been hanged, a woman who had cursed her executioners with her dying breath. She swore that her spirit would return, Harrison had written, that she would take revenge on the bloodlines of those who condemned her. The frame was crafted to contain her, to trap her essence in the wood. But the binding was imperfect. She could influence the world, cause minor disturbances, feed on the life force of those who possessed the frame. The entries grew darker as the years passed. Harrison described dreams where the woman spoke to him, promising power and knowledge in exchange for his cooperation. He resisted at first, but gradually, the temptation grew too strong. She shows me things, he wrote in 1935. The future of our family. The success that could be ours, if I only let her guide me. All she asks in return is a little of my essence, a small portion of my life force. What is a few years off my life compared to securing my family's fortune for generations? But the woman had lied. She took more than a few years. She took pieces of Harrison's soul, fragmenting his spirit until he realized, too late, that he would never be free of her. His final entries were desperate, describing his attempts to reinforce the binding, to trap her more securely in the frame. I have found a way, the last entry read, dated March 14, 1943. If I can merge my spirit with hers at the moment of my death, I can hold her. Not forever, but long enough. Long enough for my descendants to find a permanent solution. The portrait will be my anchor. As long as it exists, I can fight her. May God forgive me for what I must do. William closed the journal as dawn light crept through the curtains. He understood now. His great-grandfather had sacrificed himself, trapping his own spirit in the portrait to keep the witch contained. Every time the portrait fell, it was Harrison fighting to maintain the binding as the witch grew stronger. And now the frame was destroyed. The binding was broken. Both spirits were free. Kate stirred beside him. Did you sleep at all? No, William said, showing her the final entry. But I know what's happening now, and I think I know what we need to do. They returned to the house that morning, bringing supplies, salt, iron filings, white candles, everything Harrison's journal suggested might offer protection. The family room felt different now, charged with an energy that made the air itself feel heavy. William began by creating a protective circle with the salt, following the detailed instructions from the journal. Kate placed the iron filings at the cardinal points and lit the candles. They worked in tense silence, both aware that they were racing against time. As William completed the circle, the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Their breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. A wind that couldn't exist indoors began to swirl, scattering the remnants of broken glass. In the center of the room, two figures began to materialize. One was Harrison Morrison, looking exactly as he did in the portrait, but translucent and wavering. The other was a woman in Renaissance dress, her face twisted with centuries of rage and hatred. They were locked in struggle, Harrison's hands gripping her wrists as she tried to claw at his face. William. Harrison's voice was like wind through leaves. The journal. Page 47. The permanent binding ritual. You must hurry. William fumbled with the journal, finding the page. The ritual was complex, requiring precise pronunciation of Latin phrases and specific gestures, but there was a warning written in the margin. The ritual requires a Morrison blood sacrifice. Not death, but willing contribution of life essence. The witch's laughter filled the room. A sound like breaking glass. Another Morrison offers himself to me. How delicious. Your ancestor has weakened over the decades, boy. Soon I'll break free of him and claim what was always mine. Your bloodline will pay for the sins of the past. The sins weren't ours, William said, stepping forward. Our family didn't condemn you. We were just trying to contain the evil you became. Evil. The witch's form solidified slightly, her features becoming clearer. She had once been beautiful, with dark hair and brilliant green eyes. I was a healer, a midwife. I saved lives. But when the plague came and my herbs couldn't stop it, they called me a witch. They hanged me for failing to perform miracles. Is seeking justice for my murder evil? Justice. Harrison's voice grew stronger. You've killed dozens over the centuries. Innocent people whose only crime was owning that cursed frame. That's not justice. That's mindless vengeance. William began reading the Latin phrases, his voice shaky at first but growing more confident. Kate stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, grounding him. The witch shrieked and struggled harder against Harrison's grip, but the salt circle held her. As he reached the crucial part of the ritual, William understood what was required. He needed to offer part of his life force, not to the witch, but to strengthen the binding. It would cost him years of his life, but it would trap her permanently, ending the curse once and for all. He looked at Kate, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. She nodded, understanding without words what he had to do. William completed the incantation, feeling a pull deep in his chest as the ritual drew upon his life force. The room exploded with light, and when it faded, both spirits were gone. In their place, a small wooden box sat on the floor, bound with silver chains that gleamed with otherworldly light. It's done, William said, exhausted but relieved. She's contained, permanently this time. But Kate was staring at the box with concern. What do we do with it? We can't keep it here. We can't risk anyone opening it. William picked up the box carefully. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with contained energy. The journal mentions a place, a monastery in Italy where they specialize in containing cursed objects. They've been doing it since the Middle Ages. Then that's where we take it, Kate said firmly. We end this properly. 3 weeks later, William and Kate stood in the ancient stone chamber beneath the monastery of San Michele. Brother Thomas, an elderly monk who served as the monastery's keeper of cursed objects, carefully placed the box in a specially prepared alcove. It will be safe here, he assured them in accented English. We have contained far worse things than a vengeful spirit. She will trouble your family no more. As they left the monastery, William felt lighter than he had in months. The weight of his family's secret burden had finally been lifted. Kate squeezed his hand as they walked into the Italian sunshine. Your great-grandfather would be proud, she said. You finished what he started. William thought about Harrison Morrison, about the sacrifice he had made to protect his family. The portrait was gone now, destroyed in the final ritual. But William felt his presence somehow. A warm approval that seemed to come from within. Back home, they renovated the family room completely. Where the portrait once hung, Kate placed a mirror that reflected the garden outside. The house felt different now. Lighter. As if it too had been freed from a long burden. On quiet evenings, William sometimes thought he heard whispers in the house. But they were different now. Peaceful rather than menacing. Once, he could have sworn he heard his great-grandfather's voice saying simply, "Thank you." Margaret visited often, bringing more family albums and stories. You know, she said one evening, Harrison wrote more journals about his other collections. Most of the items were harmless, but there might be one or two that bear investigating. William and Kate exchanged glances. After everything they had been through, they had developed a sense for the supernatural, an ability to detect when something was not quite right. We'll look into it, William said. Someone needs to make sure these things don't hurt anyone, and so they became, quite unintentionally, investigators of the paranormal. The house that had once trapped them in fear became their base of operations, a safe haven from which they ventured forth to deal with cursed objects and trapped spirits. But that first case, the portrait of Harrison Morrison and the witch's curse, remained their most personal. It had brought them together, tested their courage, and shown them that love and determination could overcome even centuries-old evil. The family room where it all started became their favorite place in the house. On quiet afternoons, sunlight streaming through the windows, they would sit together and plan their next adventure. The mirror on the wall reflected not just the garden outside, but their faces. Confident and unafraid, they had faced the darkness and won. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 2 years had passed since the portrait incident. William sat in his study, surrounded by journals and artifacts that would have seemed bizarre to him before his encounter with his great-grandfather's spirit. The morning light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across a letter that had arrived yesterday. Kate entered with 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside him. She glanced at the letter's ornate seal. "Another request? From Boston this time," William replied. "A law firm. They're settling an estate and found something troubling in the deceased's collection. Since word had spread through certain discreet channels about their success with the Morrison portrait, requests had trickled in. Families with haunted heirlooms, estate lawyers with problematic inheritances, even museums with acquisitions that displayed disturbing properties. William and Kate had become reluctant experts in the field of cursed objects." Kate read over his shoulder. "Eleanor Blackwood. That name sounds familiar." William pulled out a research folder. She was mentioned in Harrison's journals. Another collector from his circle. They corresponded about their acquisitions, shared information about dealers and auctions. The letter described a music box that had been sealed in a lead-lined safe for 40 years. The law firm had opened it during the estate inventory, and 3 employees had immediately fallen ill with symptoms no doctor could explain. They recovered only when the music box was resealed. "We should go," Kate said. It wasn't a question. They had learned to trust their instincts about these matters. The next day found them in the mahogany-paneled offices of Blackstone, Humphrey, and Associates. Mr. Blackstone himself, a thin man in his 60s with nervous hands, led them to a basement storage room. Mrs. Blackwood's will was very specific, he explained, producing a keyring. The music box was to remain sealed, unless a competent practitioner could be found to properly dispose of it. She left a list of names. Yours was added by hand, quite recently. We think she must have heard about your work somehow. The storage room was cold and cramped, filled with filing cabinets and old furniture. In the corner sat a modern safe, incongruous among the vintage surroundings. Blackstone opened it with shaking hands, revealing a lead box within. "We'll take it from here," William said gently. "You should leave the building. Both of you. Don't come back for at least 2 hours." After the lawyers left, William and Kate prepared their protective circle. They had refined their technique over the past 2 years, combining elements from Harrison's research with knowledge gleaned from other sources. The work was dangerous, but they had learned to minimize the risks. Kate carefully lifted the lead box from the safe. Even through the protective material, they could feel the malevolent energy radiating from within. "This one's strong," she murmured. Inside the lead box was an antique music box of extraordinary beauty. Made of ebony and inlaid with mother-of-pearl, it depicted a moonlit forest scene. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every tree and shadow rendered in minute detail. "Don't touch it directly," William warned, though Kate already knew. They had learned that lesson the hard way with a cursed medallion 6 months ago. The burns had taken weeks to heal. Using specialized gloves made of blessed fabric and silver thread, Kate lifted the music box out. The moment it was free of the lead shielding, the temperature plummeted. Frost began forming on the windows despite the summer heat outside. "There's a note," Kate observed, pointing to a yellowed card tucked beneath the music box. William read it aloud. "For my dear Harrison, a fellow seeker of the unusual. May you find the melody as captivating as I have. Your friend in the art, Eleanor. P.S. Best played only once. The encore performance tends to be permanent. Esses. Esses. She gave him a cursed music box as a gift?" Kate shook her head. With friends like that, William consulted Eleanor's file. According to this, she acquired it from a dealer in Prague in 1938. The previous owner was found dead, apparently aged 30 years overnight. His hair had gone completely white, and his face, the description isn't pleasant. They set the music box in the center of their protective circle. William began the identification ritual they had developed, a combination of techniques that allowed them to understand the nature of a cursed object without activating its power. As he chanted, the inlaid forest scene began to move. The mother-of-pearl trees swayed in an unfelt breeze, and shadows shifted across the ebony surface. Deep within the depicted forest, something moved between the trees. "It's not just cursed," William said, breaking off the ritual. "There's something trapped inside, like the portrait, but different. This isn't containing something evil. It's imprisoning something that doesn't want to be there." Kate studied the moving scene. "Look at the shadows. They're forming letters." She was right. The shadows between the trees were shifting, arranging themselves into words in an archaic script. William photographed them quickly before they changed. "It's Old Slavonic," he said, comparing the images to a reference book. They spent the next hours researching, combing through Eleanor's papers and Harrison's journals for any reference to the music box. Finally, in a letter dated November 1938, they found what they were looking for. "My dear Harrison," Eleanor had written, "the Prague dealer told me the most fascinating story about our little musical friend. It seems a young woman, a dancer at the royal court, fell in love with a musician, but the musician loved another. And in her jealousy, the dancer poisoned her rival. As punishment, a court magician trapped her spirit in the music box, condemned to dance for eternity to her lover's final composition. The music, they say, is hauntingly beautiful, but anyone who hears the full melody will be compelled to dance with her until death. Isn't that delicious? I've been dying to open it, but I thought you might appreciate the challenge more than I." "She was trapped for a crime of passion," Kate said softly. 400 years of imprisonment for one moment of jealousy. William felt the familiar weight of moral complexity that came with their work. Not everything they encountered was pure evil. Some were victims themselves, twisted by circumstance and dark magic into something dangerous. "We can't just destroy it," Kate continued. "That would be destroying her too. She's been punished enough." William knew she was right. They had developed a code over the past 2 years. Contain the truly evil. Free the unjustly imprisoned. Find middle ground for the rest. It wasn't always clear which category something fell into, but they did their best. Harrison's journal mentions a ritual of unbinding, William said, flipping through pages. "It's risky. We'd have to play the music box, hear the melody. But if we do it right, we can free her spirit without falling under the compulsion." They prepared carefully. The unbinding ritual required additional protections. Beeswax in their ears to muffle but not completely block the sound. Ankles bound with silver chains to prevent dancing, and a specific incantation that would need to be spoken at exactly the right moment. Kate took a deep breath. "Ready?" William nodded, beginning the incantation. As he spoke the ancient words, Kate carefully lifted the music box's lid. The melody that emerged was unlike anything they had ever heard. Even muffled by the beeswax, it was heartbreakingly beautiful, a waltz that seemed to capture all the joy and sorrow of love in its notes. The inlaid scene on the box came fully alive. In the moonlit forest, a young woman in court dress danced alone, her movements graceful but desperately sad. William felt the compulsion immediately. His feet wanted to move, to join the eternal dance. The silver chains grew hot as they resisted the magical pull. He focused on the incantation, forcing the words past lips that wanted to remain closed in reverent silence. The dancer in the forest scene turned toward them. Her face, rendered in mother-of-pearl and shadow, was young and beautiful, but etched with centuries of loneliness. Her lips moved, forming words they couldn't hear over the melody. Kate watched the dancer intently. "She's saying thank you," she whispered. As William reached the climax of the incantation, the music box began to glow. The melody grew louder, more insistent, and for a terrifying moment, he thought the compulsion would overwhelm their protections. Then, with a sound like shattering crystal, the music stopped. The forest scene faded to black, The dancer was gone. The music box was just a music box. Beautiful, but mundane. In the air above it, a faint shimmer appeared, forming briefly into the shape of a young woman. She smiled at them, an expression of such gratitude and peace that it brought tears to Kate's eyes. Then she faded away, finally free. They sat in exhausted silence for several minutes. The room temperature returned to normal. Outside, they could hear the normal sounds of Boston traffic, a reminder that the everyday world continued on, oblivious to the supernatural drama that had just unfolded. "She's at peace now," Kate said finally. William carefully placed the now harmless music box back in its lead container. "Blackstone will be relieved. They can sell it as a normal antique now. Some collector will treasure it without ever knowing its history." As they packed up their equipment, Kate noticed another item in Eleanor's collection, a hand mirror wrapped in black silk. Even through the wrapping, she could sense something wrong about it. "William," she called softly. He joined her, frowning as he felt the mirror's aura. Unlike the music box's cold sorrow, this radiated a gleeful malevolence that made his skin crawl. "We'll need to come back for that," he said. Eleanor had quite the collection. They left the law office as the sun was setting, carrying their equipment and the neutralized music box. Mr. Blackstone would find a note explaining that the item was now safe, along with their recommendations for handling the rest of Eleanor's collection. Back at their hotel, they ordered room service and tried to decompress. The work took a toll, not just physically but emotionally. Every cursed object had a story, usually tragic. They were archaeologists of sorrow, excavating pain that had crystallized into dangerous supernatural forms. "I've been thinking," Kate said, pushing food around her plate. "We need help. We can't keep doing this alone." William knew she was right. They had been lucky so far, but luck wouldn't last forever. Some of the requests they received described objects far more dangerous than anything they had yet encountered. Margaret mentioned there were others, he said. People Harrison corresponded with who were involved in this kind of work. Maybe some of their descendants. Kate pulled out her laptop. "I've already started researching. There's a professor at Harvard who specializes in medieval occult texts. Her grandmother was in Harrison's circle. And there's an antique dealer in New Orleans who seems to have an uncanny ability to identify cursed objects before they cause harm." They worked through the evening, building a list of potential allies. As William researched, he found himself thinking about the dancer in the music box. 400 years she had been trapped, punished far beyond her crime. How many other spirits were similarly imprisoned? How many cursed objects held victims rather than villains? His phone buzzed. Another email, this one from overseas. A museum in London had acquired a collection that included several items flagged as potentially dangerous. The curator, having heard of their work through professional channels, wondered if they might consult. "London," Kate read, looking over his shoulder. "The Ashmore collection." "Oh, William, look at this list. A scrying mirror from John Dee's laboratory, a locket that supposedly shows the viewer their death, a chess set, where the pieces move on their own. It never ends. Does it?" William said. Though he was already mentally planning the trip, Kate kissed his cheek. "Would you want it to? We're good at this. We're helping people. And admit it. You love the research." She was right, of course. Despite the danger and the emotional toll, he found the work deeply satisfying. Each case was a puzzle to be solved, a wrong to be righted, and they were uniquely positioned to do it, thanks to Harrison's legacy and their own hard-won experience. That night, as they lay in bed, Kate asked, "Do you think Harrison knew? When he collected all those objects, do you think he understood that someone would need to clean up the mess someday?" William considered it. His great-grandfather had been obsessed with the supernatural, had paid the ultimate price for his curiosity. But he had also left behind the knowledge needed to deal with these threats. "I think he hoped someone would," William said finally. "He made mistakes, but he also made sure we'd have the tools to fix them." The next morning brought a call from Margaret. She sounded excited, which immediately put William on alert. Margaret's excitement usually meant she had discovered something significant in the family archives. "I found another safety deposit box," she announced. "It was listed under Harrison's mother's maiden name, which is why we missed it before. The bank called because the rental hadn't been paid in decades. You need to see what's inside." They changed their plans, flying back to Connecticut instead of heading directly to London. Margaret met them at the bank, practically vibrating with anticipation. The safety deposit box was larger than standard, requiring 2 keys to open. Inside were 3 leather journals and a small wooden case. "Don't touch the case," Margaret warned. "Look at the journals first." The journals were different from Harrison's others. These were written in multiple hands, in various languages. As William carefully turned the pages, he realized what he was looking at. "It's a record," he breathed, "going back generations, centuries." The journals documented a secret tradition of guardians, people who tracked and contained cursed objects throughout history. The entries went back to the 1600s, written by William's ancestors and others who had taken on the responsibility. "We're not the first," Kate said wonderingly. The most recent entries were in Harrison's hand, dated just days before his death. He wrote of his failure with the portrait frame, but also of his hope that future generations would continue the work. The final entry was a list of locations where other guardian families had settled, a network spanning the globe. He wasn't just collecting for himself, William realized. He was part of something bigger. Margaret nodded. "Look at the last page." It was a formal certificate, written in Latin and signed by representatives of 12 families. It recognized the Morrison family as hereditary guardians, charged with protecting the innocent from supernatural threats. "It's a legacy," Margaret said. "One that apparently skips generations. Your father showed no aptitude for it. But you've proven yourselves worthy." The wooden case remained unopened on the table. Even closed, they could feel power emanating from it. Not malevolent, but strong and purposeful. "That's your inheritance," Margaret said. "The tools of a guardian. Harrison's final gift to whoever took up the mantle." William and Kate exchanged glances. Opening the case would mean fully accepting the responsibility, formally taking on a role that they had been filling informally for 2 years. Kate reached for the case first. Together, William placed his hands beside hers. They lifted the lid. Inside, nested in velvet, were 3 items. A silver compass that pointed not north, but toward the nearest supernatural threat. A pair of spectacles with lenses made of polished obsidian that would reveal the true nature of any cursed object. And a ring bearing the seal of the guardian families, a sign that would identify them to others in the network. As William lifted the compass, it swung immediately toward the law office they had visited yesterday. Eleanor's mirror was calling. "No rest for the weary," Kate said, but she was smiling. They spent the rest of the day learning to use their new tools. The compass was intuitive, its needle dancing and spinning as it detected various levels of supernatural activity in the city. The spectacles were more challenging, showing layers of reality that took time to interpret. The ring, when worn, seemed to sharpen their existing sensitivity to cursed objects. That evening, they returned to Blackstone's office. Mr. Blackstone, looking somewhat shell-shocked by the day's events, let them in without question. Eleanor's mirror waited in the storage room, its black silk wrapping inadequate to contain its malevolence. Through the obsidian spectacles, William could see dark tendrils of energy writhing around it like smoke. "This one's different," he said. "It's not imprisoned or cursed. It's a gateway." Dropped, Kate checked Harrison's journals. "Here. The Whitmore mirror. Eleanor acquired it from the estate of a disgraced medium. Supposedly allows communication with the dead, but at a terrible price. Each use drains life from the user, feeding something on the other side. Do not use under any circumstances." They prepared their strongest containment ritual. This wasn't something to be freed or destroyed, but sealed away where it could do no harm. As they worked, the mirror fought them. The silk wrapping burst into flames that Kate quickly smothered. The glass cracked, revealing not reflections but glimpses of a dark realm where shadows moved with hungry intent. It took 3 hours and every technique they knew, but finally the mirror was contained in a specially prepared iron box, sealed with silver and lead. They would take it to the monastery in Italy, on their way to London. The monks had ways of dealing with gateways that they didn't. As they left the office for the second time, exhausted but victorious, Kate said, "We need to train others. Build the network back up. There are too many of these things out there for just 2 people to handle." William agreed. The Guardian tradition had dwindled, but it didn't have to die. They had the knowledge, the tools, and most importantly, the experience. It was time to pass it on. They returned home to find a package waiting, shipped from New Orleans. Inside was a letter from the antique dealer Kate had identified in her research. "I heard through certain channels that the Morrison Guardians have returned to active duty," the letter read. "My family has been waiting 70 years for this day. My grandfather knew Harrison well, and we have maintained our watch in the South. There are others like us, scattered but ready. The network can be rebuilt if you're willing to lead it." Enclosed was a list of names and locations, families in Salem, San Francisco, Miami, Chicago. Some had fallen away from the tradition, but their descendants might still carry the gift. Others had maintained their watch in isolation, waiting for someone to unite them again. "It's really happening," Kate said. "We're not just solving individual cases anymore. We're rebuilding something that was almost lost." That night, they sat in the family room where it had all began. The mirror Kate had hung still reflected the garden, but now it also reflected them. Changed. Stronger. United in purpose. William thought about the dancer they had freed that morning, about all the spirits trapped in objects around the world. Some deserved their imprisonment, but others were victims. All needed someone who could tell the difference, who could bring justice or mercy as appropriate. "Harrison would be proud," Kate said, as if reading his thoughts. "I hope so," William replied. "We're doing things differently than he did. Less collecting, more protecting. Less secrecy, more cooperation." The silver compass on the table spun lazily, detecting the minor supernatural residue that still clung to their house. It was a comfortable presence now, familiar as old furniture. They had made peace with the paranormal, found their place in the strange world between the mundane and the magical. Tomorrow they would fly to London, deal with the Ashmore collection. Next week, they would meet with the New Orleans dealer, begin establishing the new network. There were guardians to train, objects to contain or free, and a tradition to restore. But tonight, they simply sat together in the room where their journey had begun, planning for a future that Harrison Morrison could never have imagined, but had made possible through his sacrifice. The work would never end. There would always be another cursed object, another trapped spirit, another family terrorized by something they didn't understand. But they were ready for it, armed with knowledge, tools, and most importantly, each other. As midnight approached, William felt a familiar presence in the room. Just for a moment, in the corner of his eye, he saw a figure standing by the empty wall, where the portrait once hung. Harrison Morrison, free at last, raised his hand in blessing and farewell before fading away for the final time. "Thank you," William whispered to the empty air. The house settled around them, peaceful and protective. Outside, the world went on, unaware of the guardians who watched over it, who stood between the darkness and the light. It was a heavy responsibility, but one they carried gladly. They had found their calling, their purpose. The portrait had shattered, but from its pieces, something stronger had emerged, a legacy reborn, a tradition renewed, and a love tested by fire and proven unbreakable. The Guardian Network would rise again, and William and Kate Morrison would make sure it was stronger than ever.